First, the good. We know how overseas quarantine works. It takes advantage of our island nation status and it stopped the pandemic from wreaking havoc in this country. It's not easy. I've done it. 2 weeks in a room is some sacrifice, but we all get it. And tennis champion Serena Williams in Adelaide, in quarantine, waiting to play, has just shared this logic with a huge American audience.
Yeah, it's super, super strict, but it's really good. So Australia right now has, the last I heard, they had 0 cases of COVID. So that is unbelievable, right? The whole country. So that is really amazing. So when we come here in Australia, everyone has to quarantine in a room for 14 days, and it's insane and it's super intense, but it's super good because after that you can have a new normal like what we were used to last year this time in the United States. So they're doing it right, and it's definitely hard with a 3-year-old to be in the hotel all day, but it's worth it because you want everyone to be safe.
Yeah, well done Australia and well done Serena Williams. She's not whinging about it, she's just getting on with it. But the bad is how we're managing our country behind that crucial border protection. Some people always seem to want the pandemic to be worse than it is in Australia. The lockdown fetishists have been making outrageous predictions for a year now. Yet, once again, New South Wales has had no cases of community transmission today. 0 new infections. That's 10 days without a new case. How about that? Over the past 2 months, there's been a cluster or 2, no deaths, hardly anyone sick, a few dozen infections, but none over the past 10 days. There were warnings to shift the Test cricket, and in the end they cut the crowds to just a few thousand and made everyone wear masks, and they shifted or cancelled other events in New South Wales. Masks were made compulsory on public transport and in shops right across Sydney. States closed their borders to New South Wales, ruining Christmas for some people, stopping others from going to their parents' funerals or catching up with family. And here we are, no new infections for 10 days. Go figure. Clearly, the responses, the border closures and the like were over the top. But even they weren't enough for the lockdown fetishists. The ABC's resident health expert, Norman Swan, who's tried to dictate government pandemic policy for the full year now, has been proven wrong again. Just 4 weeks ago, he was tweeting about the so-called precautionary principles of the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian and how, based on the numbers and locations of infection, there should be a complete lockdown of Sydney. How irresponsible. But of course, he never stops.
So effectively doing what Victoria did, but doing it probably a bit earlier than Victoria did to prevent a serious second wave. And the worst that can happen here is that nothing happens, but the risk here is that it's spreading through Greater Metropolitan Sydney and Greater Sydney, and you don't know where it is, and there are clusters that you may not have identified.
Yeah, the worst that could happen is they ignored what he said and still nothing happened. How easy. Urging real pain, inconvenience, economic harm and social dislocation upon others, and getting it wrong again. He wants to pretend that Daniel Andrews got it right and that New South Wales had to follow suit. But clearly, Andrews drastically overreacted, and all that's been exposed now, and New South Wales has again managed to contain a situation without hurting the whole of Sydney, much less the whole of the state. Swan is the same bloke who said back in March last year that the nation's hospital system would be overwhelmed with critical care cases within weeks. That fear-mongering was out by a factor of about 100. Our critical care capacity has never used more than about 3 or 4% of the available beds for COVID-19 patients, and that was only at the very height of the Victorian outbreak. Swan ought to apologise for all of his errors rather than keep recommending lockdowns in the hope he'll be proven right. He gets a salary, lockdown or not. It's summer. The disease is almost non-existent in our country. International borders are closed. Many state borders are closed unnecessarily. Some people are wandering around in the sunshine on their own in masks for some reason, and our politicians in the main can't make the rules onerous enough. Even in the least heavy-handed state, these rules sound ridiculous.
Possible. And I do want to stress that no matter what circumstance you're in, No singing, no dancing, no mingling. Everything has to be done in a seated way. The only time you're able to dance is if you're one of the 20 in the bridal party at a wedding.
Yeah, no singing, no dancing. Sometimes it seems like the Taliban are in charge, doesn't it? But thankfully, Gladys Berejiklian's brave and sensible leadership continues to manage the risks, ensuring that her response is the most proportionate in the country, so that her state lives with the virus, proving people like Norman Swan and Daniel Andrews wrong every day. Today, the New South Wales Premier flagged a substantial easing of restrictions, with more to come in a fortnight.
You'll need to wear a mask on public transport. You'll need to wear a mask if you are a frontline hospitality worker facing the public. But in relation to retail and in relation to the public, in relation to retail staff and in relation to the public, we recommend a mask when you can't guarantee social distancing, but it will not be compulsory if you're going retail shopping or if you're a retail worker.
Sensible government, treating people like adults. The pandemic continues to create havoc in North America and Europe, of course. It always has, for all kinds of reasons, including population density, climate and people movements. The risk for us is clearly so much lower that it's hardly comparable. It's time for this country to get realistic. A year of overreaction is surely more than enough. Gladys Berejiklian and New South Wales continue to operate under a template that the whole nation should follow.